hope that leads the way. Hope is the virtue that ignites and encourages the response of the other two, of faith and love. Charles Peggy, who's a poet, likens faith, hope, and love as three sisters. And he talks about hope and love as the two older sisters, faith and love as the two older sisters, and hope as the youngest sister. And it is hope that takes the hand of the two older sisters and leads her and moves them forward. When we think about when we have faith, see, faith, as I understand it, then is, and some of this is coming from the research of Sam Newlands coming out of Notre Dame University in South Bend. Sam Newlands led a whole initiative called Hope and Optimism, and you can go on the website Hope and Optimism, I think .com or hopeandoptimismworkshops.com, where he brought together a number of scholars across various disciplines, from neurology to psychology to philosophy, to be able to talk about what hope and optimism are across these various domains. Art, looking at hope in art and in film and all of these things. And so what he says, the difference between faith and hope primarily is that faith is a construct that is related to belief, to thoughts, to ideas, to certainty of those thoughts. It's the worldview upon which that we organize our actions against. Not everybody, to some degree, has some degree of faith. Even if you are agnostic, you have a certain, you put your creed in something. You whether it is strictly in science, and we could talk about that for sure. But if that's something that you believe in, then you believe in science, and you believe that the creed is that. Or if you're a Christian, you believe, as we talked about with the Nicene Creed and things. But faith becomes this organizing set of principles that we set our life around. Then love is the act of charity. It is the act of choosing to will the good of the other person. It is a response to the organizing principles, to the value sets that we have. But hope exists more in the affective nature of things, in the emotions, in the sense of, like, if I believe that these things to be true, it's because I hope that these things are to be true. If I believe in a good God, then I hope that he really does care for me. I believe in his providence and his goodness, and I believe that he came and he sent his son. These are the acts of faith. These are the things that we believe in the creed. And it's because I want my hope to align to that. I want my desires, the things that I long for, the value set that is actually going to guide me towards being the best version of myself. Hope leads the way. Hope is what allows us to be able to have honest faith and then to be able to love. When I choose to love my wife, I'm hoping that it is for the greater good. When I'm choosing to discipline and to love and to give good things to my kids, it is out of a sincere hope that they will become the best versions of themselves so that they can then be productive members of society. So at some level, we see faith, hope, and love as three parts of a whole. And we can't talk about hope without its connection to faith, and we can't talk about hope without its connection to love. So what we're trying to do today is to take an examination of what hope actually is, put it in its context, as I've been trying to do over the last few minutes, in terms of seeing how it fits within the broader context of healing, but then how it fits within these three virtues of faith and love as well. All right. So now that we have some context upon which that we're speaking about here, what is hope? And how much time do I have? So we could talk all day about this. All right. So let me get my PowerPoint up. Give me one quick second, everybody, as I work towards getting this up. All right. Here we go. Everybody can see this, hopefully. All right. So how do we live with hope? And what is hope? Again, what I'm going to be doing for the purposes of our lecture today is I'm going to be focusing in on just the psychological literature, at least for the first part, excuse me. And then I'm going to focus in on the theological kind of components of hope. And when we come back from the break, going into the second one. All right. So when we look at hope as a psychological trait, one of the founding researchers, leading researchers, I should say, on hope theory was a guy by the name of Dr. Shane Lopez. And Shane says this. He says that hope is a belief that the future will be better than the present, combined with the belief that I have some power to make it so. So the belief that the future will be better than the present, combined with the belief that you have the power to make it so. And so here, what we're seeing is that hope is not just this passive, I hope for the lottery. I hope that the Saints win on Monday night. I hope that Michael Thomas gets better. All these things. Though we honestly have no control over how the Saints are going to perform on Monday. Now, I know we're fans and we all have our superstitions and we wear the same dirty socks every Sunday or Monday in this case, or we have our lucky hats and we feel that those things bring about some element of control over the game, but they really don't. Like we joked with my wife, we'd say like every time she wore a Saints jersey on Sunday, the team was going to win. And that isn't the case, of course, but that's what we placed our hope in. It was a fool's hope, of course, because it's a passive hope. It's a hope that doesn't genuinely have any sense of control over the outcome of the circumstance of the game. So do we believe that the future will be better than the present? And not just, we can look at it broadly, and we recognize that there's a certain optimism that everybody has. That we as people have an optimism bias. We genuinely, most people tend to feel that the future will be better in a very general sense. But when we're speaking about hope, I want to talk about it in the particular sense. You in your life, where you find yourself today in 2020, here, September, I don't even know what today is, the 18th, 2020. Do you believe that tomorrow will be better than today? Do you believe that September 18th, 2021 will be better than where you are today? And how do you know what that means? So what are the things what are the goals that you measure your life by? What are the values? What are the desires that you have that you're trying to obtain, that you're trying to achieve? And do you feel then that you have some capacity in being able to achieve said desires? If you have both of those, we would say that you are a hopeful individual, again, psychologically speaking. So when we look at this, we're saying that the goals that we have in life, together with what Shane Lopez and Rick Snyder and other theorists call willpower, which is this sense of desire, this acknowledgement of what it was within my imagination. What are the goals that I have some desire and some energy and some agency and some motivation to want to go to achieve? Together with way power, do I have pathways thinking? Do I have an understanding of how to be able to go achieve those goals? It's together, the willpower, the desire, the agency thinking with pathways thinking, with the way power that allows for one to say that we have hope. All right, so let's bring this down to my life here. I tend to be a little bit on the ADHD side of things, and I tend to have a lot of ideas and a lot of things cooking in the oven, so to speak. A lot of coals in the fire that I'm always working on, and that's my problem. My issue is not that I have enough goals. I have too many goals, and I have to prioritize what those goals are, because certain goals just aren't achieved rather quickly. They require some real time and dedication and effort and focus. Well, recently I ran a marathon, and I am 40. I turned 40 in July. I ran cross country in high school. And ever since high school, I had wanted to be able to run a marathon. It was one of those goals that I had in my life. It was one of those bucket list items, things that I wanted to do. And I always felt like as a runner, this was like the gold standard of what it meant to be a runner, was to be able to run a marathon, because it's 26.2 miles. And why would you do that? I mean, you think about the Causeway Bridge is the longest bridge in the world, is only 23 miles. Like, you still have another 3 miles on top of the Causeway Bridge to get to a full marathon. But it's a big goal. I wanted it. I desired it. It was something that I wanted to achieve, that I wanted to be able to achieve since I was 17 years old. But I didn't get it done until I was 39. That was 22 years that it took for me to be able to find the right time. Well, why? Because even though I had the willpower, the desire for it, the opportunity for it, the knowledge, the pathways was not present. I got married young. I had kids young, and I did my graduate studies. And I was focusing on my career and put all those other goals ahead of this other one with regards to the marathon. And so finally, I saw 40 on the horizon last year, and I said, you know what? I want to be able to get this thing done before I'm turned 40. Whatever reason, just wanted to be able to say that I did at least one marathon before. And it was a good time in my life. My kids are old enough that and established enough within education, within the schools. We've been living in New Orleans for a few years. We're established here within the community. I have a good job that gives me some stability. It was an opportunity for me to be able to say, okay, let's go after this crazy goal of running a marathon. And so the way power started to kick in. Went on YouTube, started reading books, started talking to other runners, went to physical therapy, invested in a Garmin running watch, did the training that was available to me through certain apps, and I dedicated myself to running the marathon. Now, I will say, up until the day itself, I did not know if I would accomplish it. I mean, 26.2 miles is such an incredible feat that I really honestly didn't know if I would finish it, because I had never run that much. Even in my training, the highest that I got to my training was 20 miles on a run. There's still another 6 miles on top of that I would do on race day that I hadn't prepped for. But that's what all the training says, is to cap. Anyways, I'm getting too much into this. The point is that I dedicated myself to the pathways of being able to achieve the goal. So the marathon for me was this big goal that I had this long time desire to do. But then it wasn't until I had the way power, the capacity, the pathways to be able to achieve that goal that I really had the hope in being able to accomplish it. Now, I will say that when I finished the race, I ran it here in New Orleans, the Rock and Roll Marathon back in February, that as soon as the race was done, I ran a good time, 10-minute miles, ran it at 4:22. Didn't break 4 like I really wanted to, but hey, that's okay. I was really happy with the result nonetheless. When I crossed the finish line, I got my snack, and I walked over to where my family was and my kids. My boys were there. I have 4 sons and my wife. Everybody was there. And I cried my eyes out. I'm not going to lie. The experience of accomplishing this goal that I had been holding on to for 22 years of my life was such a meaningful experience for me. And it's something that even now, 6 months, 7 months later, that I've been able to draw on as an anchor of hope when I find myself being in hopeless moments. It wasn't something that, like when I completed my doctorate, that was another big goal as well. But my doctorate, I was able to anchor in kind of a pragmatism. Like I knew it would open up doors for me professionally. I knew also that the training of the doctor would help me to be able to do lectures like this. It sharpened my thinking, sharpened my intellect, made me a better writer, made me a better communicator, made me a better teacher. All of those things was the fruit of the doctorate. But there wasn't any practical necessarily sense of the marathon, except to say that it was just a strong desire. And I will say for me, it was just as meaningful, and I cried just as much on the day I completed the marathon as I did on the day I completed my doctorate. So I just wanted to say all that as an example of what hope is and how it looks like in these particular contexts. So movies, stories, love superhero films. This movie, I don't have time to go into full expose in it, but this is a great movie that's all about hope. Suffice to say, no spoilers, that, you know, how do you respond to the worst thing that happens to you? That's what Endgame was all about. And you see that the characters don't have full hope in the project until you see the way power, until the plan comes into action. Once the plan is in action, that's when you start seeing the characters develop hope. So don't want to say too much else about it because I don't have the time for it. So let me just kind of run through a couple of the things for the sake of honoring our conversation and honoring our time. As we've been speaking about, hope is about possibility. It's not about certainty. And that's what makes hope so darn tricky. You know, in Dante's Inferno, the sign that goes over hell is "Cast all ye hope, all who enter here." And then hell, the most inner circle of hell is demonstrated as not as a place of burning fire, but is as a frozen place, a place where people are frozen and stuck. You think about that. No kinetic energy. What is absolute zero Kelvin, where molecules themselves don't even move? There's no movement. There's no possibility for something else to happen because you are frozen, literally. What a great image of what hopelessness actually does. So hope then is about possibility. It's about the potential. It's about trying to achieve things and put ourselves out there knowing that we could possibly fail. I love basketball. I've been talking about sports already. I love basketball. In my 6-year-old, we like to play sports, and I go out there and we'll shoot hoops with him. It would be an erroneous and a folly statement for me to say, I hope to beat Jude in basketball. That's a dumb statement if I've ever heard one, because there's 100% certainty that if I wanted to crush him and beat him and teach him life lessons about hardships, then I could do it. But I don't do that because I'm a dad and I love him and I play easy on him. But nevertheless, if I really wanted to beat him, I could. So I would never say that I hope to beat Jude in basketball. But right now we're in the thick of the NBA playoffs, and equally of a dumb statement would be that I hope to beat LeBron James in basketball. LeBron James would crush me on basketball. He wouldn't even have to think about it. I mean, it would just be completely an annihilation if I was to play him. There would be no hope in that situation. So from perfect success to perfect failure, somewhere in the middle is where hope lies. And it's this that makes hope such a doggone hard process, because it makes us, to require some degree of vulnerability. See, but when we look at it in this sense, and we recognize that there's something about potential failure in pursuing our dreams, in pursuing our goals, that actually makes hope realistic. We've been talking earlier about hope not being this passive concept, and it isn't. It isn't. It has to be anchored in something that is truthful. So when we talk about way power and willpower again being agency, desire, way power, pathways thinking. What pathways thinking does is that it acknowledges that whatever goal you have, there's many ways to be able to achieve that goal. But none of those ways are without obstacles. See, hope anticipates obstacles. Hope recognizes that we live in a world that is working against us sometimes, and we have people that we deal with that aren't necessarily the most noble or the most charitable, or that even in myself I have to contend sometimes with my own selfishness or laziness, or that being able to do whatever it is that I desire sometimes requires a lot of time, a lot of patience, and sometimes it just requires some luck. Success sometimes is just a product of luck. But as Edna likes to say in The Incredibles, luck favors the prepared. And so we have to be prepared for whatever obstacles may present themselves. So hope then is realistic in its assertions. Therefore, hope requires some degree of courage. Courage. When you start saying your goals and you start telling other people that you want to do something, you want to run a marathon, or you want to improve your community, or you want to get better at your schooling, or whatever the particular goals are that you have in your life, and they have to be particular goals. I think this is why I appreciate so much what Lauren and Drew Holiday are doing, and others that are looking at the larger questions, societal questions, and taking particular goals towards them, saying, okay, what I can do is, and this is what they're doing, is investing their finances in minority business owners and being able to help them and give grants and scholarships to be able to help their businesses get off the ground. Or when we encourage people to vote, whatever political party you are, engaging within the political process, not forsaking your rights that are given to you. These things, as soon as we start acting and engaging with our desires, it requires some courage, doesn't it? It requires courage to be able to stand up for what we believe to be truthful, yes, but also it requires courage to be able to tell other people, because as soon as I tell somebody else that I'm going to run a marathon, or that I'm going to do X or whatever it is, all of a sudden I've allowed that person to hold me accountable to my goals. And so saying that, being vulnerable, saying what it is that I want to do, but I'm also now being held accountable to the people who love me. Accountability, not just in a punitive sense, but in an encouragement sense. When my wife says, hey, you need to go on a run, I can see that you're feeling a little sad, a little down. I know if you go on a run, it's going to be what's best for you. Giving that little nudge to be able to do that, those are the times that she holds me accountable to my desires. But it requires courage for me to be able to share these things with her and to invite other people into this process. And the last thing that I want to say, for the sake of time here, is that hope is battle tested. Hope is battle tested. And we see this very beautifully articulated here in the passage from Romans, where St. Paul says, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access to this grace in which we stand. And we boast in hope of the glory of God. Not only that, but we even boast of our afflictions, knowing that affliction produces endurance, and endurance proven character, and proven character hope. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. Hope, an authentic hope that does not disappoint, is one that is anchored in story, anchored in our experience, anchored in our memory, anchored in our capacity to overcome the difficulties that have been present to us, anchored in our capacity to set high goals for ourselves and to go after them. And then when we've gone after them, to be able to have some momentum in life to keep moving forward, regardless of the obstacles that happen, because the obstacles will happen. Trial will happen. Hardship will happen. Those things are unavoidable this side of heaven. But our hope is anchored in our capacity to overcome these things. So we believe in a hope that is battle tested, and a hope that genuinely guides us and leads us to be the best versions of ourselves. So with this, I'll end. Hope matters. Hope matters when it comes to healing. Hope matters when it comes to this conversation about how do we move forward as a person? How do we move forward as a society? And hope is a choice. Hope is not something that we can just relegate and say that we're going to let go of, or we're just going to choose this passive notion or this Pollyanna optimistic blind view of the future. Hope is a choice. We choose hope. Hope can be learned doing things like this in the seminar. And I'll speak more about other ways that hope can be learned here in a little bit. But then hope is also contagious. That's the key. That's the key. You want to bring more hope to your community? Be a more hopeful person. You find yourself being low in hope, surround yourself with high hope individuals, because we as humans are social creatures, and we have the capacity to help encourage, to help bring hope to other individuals, and to help them to be able to achieve the things that we have been speaking about. So I'm gonna pass this back over to Dr. Amick and to the panel. And thank you guys so much for allowing me to at least offer these introductory remarks about what hope is.
All right, Jordan is now placing our panelists up. Jordan, do we have Chuck Roth? Excellent. I'll invite Dr. Angel Adams Parham as well as Mr. Chuck Roth to go ahead and go off mute. And what we'll do now is, this is the same pattern that we'll follow for the next two talks as well. Chuck, if you go ahead and go off mute for us, please. After Dr. Sacasa helps us to understand some aspect of hope, and I really appreciated one of the things that you said, Mario, which was that we can have hope in hope. We can actually grow in hope, right? We can focus on hope. We can have workshops. We can develop this virtue through our natural means, as well as being open to the supernatural gift of the virtue of hope, which we're going to explore in our second section. Okay, so applying now, applying what Dr. Sacasa has shared with us about hope, about the psychological dimension of hope, and what I heard there was kind of the distinction, a little bit of the distinction between nature and grace in the Catholic theological tradition, and something we're attentive to, but kind of what is the understanding of hope that any human person could have on one level, but then an additional level, another order, which is, how can we then respond even more so to the gift of hope that comes specifically in the fact that God is so in love with us that he became one of us, right? That we need this modeling, we need this association. And so God, knowing we could not do that ourselves, in the incarnation, 2020 years ago, became one of us to reveal to us what true hope was. So the first question that I'll give, and we'll take about 25 minutes to discuss this, 25 to 30, and then just so that you're aware for your scheduling, we'll take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll begin our second session and our third session. I'll just go ahead and tee off. with kind of this dynamic of hope that Dr. Sacasa talked about, that hope involves possibility, that it has to be realistic, that it has to be, it involves courage, and also that it's battle tested. Angel, I'll invite you maybe to share some thoughts and some comments on how this informs the work that you do.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Sacasa, for another very insightful talk. So yeah, as I was listening to this, I was thinking about the young people that I work with who are coming from a situation that is very difficult and where we might be able to understand why hope might be something that is rather evanescent and very difficult to sustain. So I am working with young people who are coming from a very low income community, who are dealing with a number of challenges, who, right out on their streets, they can see examples of crime and violence and victimization every single day. They're struggling in school. They are not always in a situation where they are treated with the highest amount of dignity or hope in school. There are a number of things that they're working with. One of the things that I appreciated is when you talked about what is required for human flourishing, you noted that it is rooted in the virtues, right? And that hope is primary among those. And I would very much agree. And so part of what I have been wrestling with, because I'm trained as a sociologist, which in some ways is kind of the opposite of the continuum of psychology. Of course, they work together. Is thinking about, I'm always wrestling with, so how do we think about this relationship between hope at the individual level and its relationship to structural injustices and inequalities outside of the individual, right? So clearly, they're not, they're related to each other in some way. And, we spend a lot of time in sociology thinking about this idea of agency and structure, how are they related to each other, right? Part of the reason that I do the work I do in our community with our children is because I do want them to have that hope, right? And because I realize that there are so many structural factors stacked against them, but I do believe it takes real flesh and blood human beings in their lives to be part of that, right? It's not just going to be a program that's going to do it, although we do need programs, right? It's not just going to be resources, although we do need resources. So I wondered if you could say something about that. Part of also what I think about is that it can sometimes feel very easy to say, well, people just need to work hard and cultivate hope. And they do need to work hard and cultivate hope, but I can't help, the sociologist in me just cannot help thinking about, okay, but what about all these other structural factors? How do we bring some kind of balance between those or recognize those challenges while also helping to cultivate that hope?
Yeah, can I take a stab at the conversation here? This is great. Angel, I greatly appreciate your comments and your perspective as a sociologist and that asking these questions and examining them from a broader context. Yeah, as a counselor and one who's trained more in the psychological sciences, we tend to get more at the individual level because that's where I operate. I operate with individuals in counseling or couples and marriage counseling or to some degree families, but some of the broader questions are harder to articulate because it is in my domain of science. So, but I think the question you're asking is really good. I mean, it's not that we just blindly encourage people. We have to acknowledge things as they are. And for many people in the circumstances you find yourselves in, you have to acknowledge that the kids that you're working with are in the environments that they're in. And everything you just articulated about high exposure to violence, seeing crime happening, them dealing with forces that are working actively against their well-being and against their good. Those are all things that we have to honestly take into consideration when it comes to our personal response to this. Now, we can break this up. So then we have to break it up into a million different pieces. When we talk about something like racism, Racism isn't something that we can just plug into an algorithm and get a response to. It's too broad. It's too endemic. It's too all encompassing of an issue. That what I would do in examining the literature with hope, and I think what we're trying to do is to say, how do we make it bite-sized? And how then do we say, well, what is my particular role within it? So whether it's education, but then as the individual who experiences racism, what is your response to that? How do you work towards still trying to be the best version of yourself, even when these obstacles are working against you? Now, part of that then could mean that you are called then to be a leader in the community to rise up against it. Somebody like a Martin Luther King, for example, who operated out of a high hope, perspective, that he saw the injustice and felt that it was his place to actively work towards rallying the troops to bring about some real change. Somebody like Rosa Parks, similar, who said, enough's enough. And then the response that happened in those things. So individuals certainly play a role within this. But we're not all called to be the Martin Luther Kings of the world. We're not all called to be the Mahatma Gandhis of the world. We're not all called to be Rosa Parks or being put in situations where we're going to have that degree of impact on society. Nevertheless, our response to the circumstances that we find ourselves in are ours and ours alone. And so I think that what we can do is encourage people to make honest assessments of where they're at in their life and honest assessments of what it is that they want to achieve in their lives, and take all of it into consideration, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to be able to set people up for the greatest potential that they could have.
Excellent, Mario. Thank you. Thank you. And I think that, that certainly that balance is important, right? So one, recognizing agency, which you identified as essential, but two, being aware of what the challenges are, which for me is, kind of brings me to the importance of opening up possibility and really, I think addressing a very fundamental challenge that our heart and mind students have articulated, and that is that even before you get to the element of agency, you have to be able to imagine and be able to realize that change is possible and that personal change is possible, which means that we have to be able to effectively engage the imagination.
Yep.
And I think this opens up a number of the things we've been talking about at the University of Holy Cross, including, do I have models, right, that have come from, similar backgrounds, similar experiences, etc., so that I can look and I can say, oh, wow, yes, I really could be like her. One of the, we've got a few people in particular that have been certainly friends of the program, Chief Marshal Pierre, Nurse Danielle, who I think are wonderful examples of African Americans who are professionally as well as very personally effectuated and very much living these virtues. But an early friend of the program was Miss Gian James, who I think serves as an example at the university of a woman of color who really works with a lot of first-gen students, so that even before you talk about ways that they can, grow in the virtues and the steps there, so that they can say, okay, I kind of look like her, right? I can imagine being who she is one day because of that. And I think in many cases we presuppose that.
Yeah, and this is why representation is absolutely important. I think, Angel, you shared that story beautifully last time about your experiences and how you've been able to impact others, young women, and even how some educators helped you. And you're like, you didn't know that being a professor was even a possibility. You had no idea that was even that wasn't even in your imagination. And so being able to encounter others who you said, wow, if she could do it, I can do it. That degree of, as we've been talking about, boots on the ground, you said beautifully, it's people. Yes, we need programs. Yes, we need resources, but all these structures are at the mercy of the virtues of the people who run them, honestly. And so this is where I continually see the both and in all of this. But yes, representation 100% is part of what captures our imagination to be able to even have desires and goals and possibilities.
And I think one thing that we can do to facilitate the participation of others in that is to have that as a priority and to do it with integrity. Mm-hmm. So that people realize, okay, well, the people that look like me and that are doing these particular roles are doing so they weren't simply chosen because of their color, but because of a high degree of competency, proficiency, professionalism, and they also serve as that example. And I think that approach with integrity is something that I think we can get even more people to get behind.
Yeah, if I could just speak to this just a little bit more. I obviously already confessed that I'm a Marvel superhero fan, and I love movies. And honestly, my favorite of the Marvel movies is Black Panther, and I'm not going to lie. And I took my boys to go see Black Panther when it came out. We got in a little bit late, so we were watching the movie. And as soon as the movie ended, we got in with the lights were already down, so we just were in the movie, kind of enjoying it. As soon as the lights go on, the movie's over, and we're getting up, and I look around in the theater, and I would say 3/4 of the theater was filled with African Americans. And I was like, I get it. Like, I get it. Like, this is your movie. I get it. Like, it's my movie too, because I'm feeling the struggle as well. But like, I get why like the African American community rallied behind this movie. And now, rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman, who died, just here recently. But I mean, I got it. I got it in terms of like what possibilities are being opened up. And I thought that movie did a wonderful job kind of highlighting both of this, not to give too many spoilers, but the villain, the questions that Killmonger is asking are the right questions, as somebody raised in a poor community in Oakland, suffering the plights of racism in America. He basically is saying, hey guys, what the heck? If you've had these superpowers this whole time, why haven't you been engaged? And rightfully calls them out. But Killmonger's response, his answer to the problem is cynicism. Burn the whole thing down. Power, domination. We're going to be better than everybody by taking over everything. And that isn't the hopeful response. That's the beauty of what Chitala's response is in trying to pursue virtue and saying, yes, we have these great powers, but we have a responsibility towards it. But man, that movie blew my mind. I've seen it so many times, and absolutely believe that it's the best of the Marvel movies. I think it should have won the Oscar that year, but that's just me because I'm a bias for superhero movies. But that's besides.
I want to also just affirm, the amazingness of Black Panther as a movie, yes. And in terms of priming the imagination. So important. I also took my daughters to see that. My children's African dance teacher took the kids to see it, and I just wonder, like, if I had seen something like that as a young child, what would that have done? Even as an adult, it just blew my mind, right? And yeah. One of the key questions that is at the opening and that closes the movie is, who are you? Mm-hmm. And that question is so significant, especially for African American people. I mean, it's important for everyone, right? It's important in a deeper spiritual sense for all of us. Who are we? Why are we here? But for African Americans in particular, that question about who are you? This goes, back, I think W.E.B. Du Bois put this very well with his concept of double consciousness. That this idea that Blacks in America were struggling in the sense of wanting to be both American and to be Black, but having the sense that they were kind of in this in between. They weren't fully welcomed into the core of being American, right? And there was something about their Blackness that wasn't really fully welcome. But they felt that they wanted to be both of them. They wanted to not have to reject Blackness in order to be American. They wanted to be both. But then also, having been severed literally in a very violent way from their background and building something new here, that kind of shock reverberates down the centuries. And, I think many people wonder, why can't they just get over it? That was 400 years ago. It doesn't work that way. When you're in a situation where you are persistently getting messages that you are not as good as, you are not as beautiful as, you are not as smart as, your people have not accomplished as much as, that is over and over in so many large and small ways emphasized to you growing up in this society. And so when that is happening in every small and large way, always reminding you of that, you do have to have this kind of spiritual resilience and imagination to be able to overcome that and to see something different. Many researchers have noted that for Black immigrants coming to the United States often have a very different experience than African Americans who have grown up here. Many of them are coming from places that are majority Black. And in terms of, I don't have all the vocabulary in terms of the psychology of it, Dr. Sacasa would probably, but there's a very different psychology of growing up where you are in the majority, where your kind of your vision of what is good and beautiful looks like you, compared to when you're in a situation as we are in the United States, and where there's been this history. And in terms of representation, when you have been represented, it often has been in very negative ways. So anyway, a very long way of saying Black Panther was amazing, and it was wrestling with all of these larger questions that I think many who are in the majority don't really quite understand why that's still a thing for many African Americans.
Yeah,
I think that element in particular of modeling is important because it's so present, right? It's so visceral. I think we tend to associate, we're human persons, right? We are essentially social, and part of love is shared, right? Shared qualities, shared traits, shared experiences, etc. And so I think that there is a lot to be mined there as far as that initial modeling. We had a listening session and a number of different comments and some kind of anecdotes to be able to unpack it at the University of Holy Cross. And one of them was a girl who felt really challenged by her advisement and by the way that she perceived her advisor to have said, these are realistic possibilities, these are not. I wonder if one area as part of this dynamic of hope that Dr. Sacasa has articulated is how do we highlight the obstacles? How do we highlight the challenges while at the same time, meaning, follow that the goals have to be realistic, while at the same time keeping in mind how important it is to be able to imagine something other, to imagine something different. And so I'll share this, this question for Chuck. In Boys Hope, Girls Hope, how do you, and for those of you that are unfamiliar, maybe Chuck, you can just briefly describe what Boys Hope, Girls Hope does. I can remember in just my experience in high school, as part of the, we are a Holy Cross school. The Marianites, of course, are a big part of our history. But the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, are a huge part of the Catholic identity of New Orleans. And part of their focus has always been to exercise the preferential option. And one of the ways they do that here in New Orleans is by making, slots available at Jesuit High School for students from challenged backgrounds, family structures, etc. And what I remember was that the Boys Hope guys that went to Jesuit lived in a home that provided a strong family structure, that provided support, that provided all the things that allowed for those whose minds, whose intellects and possibilities allowed them to go to school. In this case, Jesuit, or it looks like Cabrini and Dominican and some others. Chuck, how do you navigate, in this case, high school education, providing a family structure, and yet still maintain the modeling, especially from the communities that your students come from? Can you talk about how you maintain that balance?
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you. And we're a residential program, so we have 2 homes, one for boys, one for girls. We recreate a college-educated parent home environment, so all of our staff are college educated. So again, they're serving as that model and that kind of that vision as to this is something I can accomplish. And obviously having diverse staff is a critical part of that, where our young men and women get to see people who look like them, who have finished college and who are, in a leadership role in the house and saying, here's the path I took to get to having a college degree and have an opportunity. And so one, we have what we call partner in parenting is part of how we engage the family. We have an open door policy for the kids' parents to come by. We include them in parent-teacher conferences, extracurricular activities, college visits when we start looking at colleges, and just making sure, and what I always say is that, I want the parents, the biological parents, to get to celebrate and enjoy the success of their children as they move through these stages in life. Because, you know, when, you know, so many of our parents are struggling, they're working multiple jobs, and, you know, maybe they don't get to go to parent-teacher conferences and hear that their kid's really smart. You know, maybe they don't get to go to all of their games. And with college, when you start bringing a parent onto a college campus with their kid, the parents are more excited than the kids are, you know, because for a lot of times it's going to be the first kid to go to college in their family. And so, and, you know, that's just a different game. And for them to begin to see that, hey, my kid is going to go to college, does change that dynamic. And so part of it is trying to bring the family along with us as we go through this process. You know, that changes with every family. We have grandparents raising grandkids, and while we might have a couple of grandkids, there's still several at home who, you know, or prevent maybe the grandparent from being as engaged as they would like to be. And so there are some challenges to that. There's no doubt about it. I think getting back to you know, the talk, the faith, hope, and love, and really focusing on hope. One of the things when Dr. Sacasa was talking is that, you know, we really start with accomplishing little things and being successful in little things. And it might be, you know, we're going to make all A's and B's this quarter, and we're going to do it with, we're going to do homework every night. You're going to have some help with homework. We're going to look at areas where, you know, maybe you're struggling, and we're going to get some extra help there. And so through a process of setting goals, action steps on little things such as that, keeping their room clean, earning full allowance for this week, and begin to see the process of when I do the things that I'm supposed to do, and you know, oftentimes the results are positive. And so, and that expands to as they get older, we start talking about college. Somewhere after 7th grade, we start planning college. And so, you know, we start putting them on college campuses. We start talking about setting financial goals. How much money do you need to save to go to college? And start doing little things like that. And then, you know, again, they begin setting financial goals. They begin setting academic goals. And as we go through that process, you know, the goals can become bigger. You know, for the 16-year-olds, I can tell you when they're 15 in 6 months, their goal is to get a driver's license. Well, when you go bring that down, so that's their dream. The willpower is, hey, you're going to have to take driver's ed, and you're going to have to go sit in a class for 30 hours, and you're going to have to practice driving, and you're going to have to do all these things. And we make them find a driver's ed class, figure out the schedule with the staff. And so there comes the way power. You know, you got to have to take some action. It's fine to want your license, and it's fine to want all these things, but unless you're going to start taking action, you're not going to get your license. Mm-hmm. And so by doing that, and again, that's a real easy one because they all end up getting their license, even though some of them think they're not going to pass driver's ed, and there's all this other, you know, there's all those concerns, and then they get it, and you know, it's a huge accomplishment for them. And then, you know, comes college. You know, our college kids go through the same process. There's, you know, I know over years that if they do what they're supposed to do, they're going to get to go to college, and they're going to be able to go at an affordable personal cost. And it might not be to the college of their choice, but they're going to have some good options. And so grades, finances, but then you start looking at financial aid, scholarships, you know, all of the different things they need to do, TOPS. And if they're doing all of these little things as they move through this process, they begin to see that, hey, my grades are in place, my ACT score is in place, that's going to hopefully get me some money. Financial aid, you know, the FAFSA is based on, you know, obviously need, but all these little pieces start to come together. And believe it or not, it's really crazy because, I mean, I've had kids with a 4.2 GPA and a 33 on the ACT thinking they might still not get to go to college because no one had ever been in college in their family before. And I'm thinking, like, you're going to college, you know, and you're going to be able to have a lot of options, but they still have, for some reason, you know, there's still this questionable piece that says something's going to happen that's going to prevent me from going. And that's where you get back to, you the trauma and the being let down in different stages of their life where I didn't get to do the things that I wanted to do because of where I am socioeconomically, racially, whatever it might be, that there have been letdowns in their lives. And so it's about, being that security, being that reassurance, and kind of getting them through that place. And so like our two seniors that graduated last year, it wasn't until July until they figured out that they're going to college. They're not having to take out any loans. They're both going to LSU. They're in honors dorms. They really got everything they wanted for college, but it wasn't literally until mid to late July that both of them were able to kind of relax and say, all right, I'm going, it's done. And then COVID hit them. Maybe I'm not going, And so there was, they knew they were going to college, but not the traditional, and it's still not traditional. But, all of these things go back, kind of the stages that Dr. Sacasa, and I know I'm talking too much, but that they go through. But what the other piece that really hit home for me in that talk is that we go through this process every year with the different kid, so I go through it all the time. So I know it's all going to work out, but you see the stress on them that it might not work out. And, in spite of having, kids go through that process and go to good schools a year or two ahead of them, and they see that process and they have, that they've seen other people do it. And a lot of those kids look like them and go to the same schools they've gone to and that kind of stuff. But they still have to move through those range of emotions and thought processes. And so I think again, going through this hope is a critical element. I always saw it as leadership. And so when we have older kids who are hopeful and do think positive and are reassuring to the other kids, you see that hope kind of become contagious, and that's recently in our girls' house. We have some rock stars in our girls' house. I mean, they are knocking it out the park at the middle school level, high school level, and man, they are blasting college. And it's just like, it's become contagious in the house, and it's almost like a competition. You don't want to have the lowest GPA in the house, and, but it's, we have a little sixth grader right now saying, I'm going to make all A's, I'm going to make all A's, I'm going to make all A's, because she wants to go to, she's saying she might not want to go to Dominican, so she wants to have good grades so the other schools are wanting to go there too. And so it's just, but she sees that academic performance means opportunity, and she's gotten that message more from the older girls than really from us. I mean, we say it too, but obviously I don't know anything. So she relies much more on what the older girls believe than what I say. And, but it is contagious, and we've had some issues in our boys' house where our seniors are really doing well in school. They're both 3.8 GPAs, but they don't want that leadership role. Like they tell the younger boys, man, you got to do what you got to do. I did what I got to do. And it's kind of like, you're on your own, man. It's up to you whether you make it or not. And that's a very different dynamic than we see at the girls' house. And you see the boys kind of be like, well, why do I have to figure out my own path? And they still look up to them and that kind of stuff. But you see where not having that leadership, not having quite that engagement, the impact that has, the negative impact that can have on the younger kids. And again, there's some positive too, but it's a different dynamic than the girls, and the emotion is very different. The boys are, our two seniors don't really tell you anything unless you ask them. Where the girls, you got to say, all right, I got other things to do. We've been talking about school for an hour. I need to, get back to some fundraising. But it's just interesting in just hearing you talk about. Again, where hope impacts and becomes contagious, but where that lack of hope, you can see, even within a very similar setting, can have very different results. And so
I think that's really insightful, Chuck. I think maybe I'm taking notes, certainly from what Angel and from what you were saying, to be able to even, certainly improve the heart and mind community. But I wonder if, as you're talking, it might be helpful to get the Boys Hope and Girls Hope together, that maybe with that masculine and feminine dynamic, with that, the empathy present there, as well as the encouragement, maybe that'll be a step going forward for y'all as well.
Yeah, just a good story on that. So this past Saturday, we, obviously are social distancing from at least people outside of the organization. We had a big crab boil on Saturday for all the kids and scholars, and water balloon fights. And so they wanted to do boys against girls, and the girls were like, the boys were like, well, it's really not fair because we're gonna beat y'all in everything, and so it's not fair that it would be boys and girls. We should really mix it up. And the girls were like, absolutely not. We're not mixing it up. You're not gonna beat us. And the girls beat them in the tug of war. They beat them in the balloon fight because they all worked together. They were determined to beat them as a group, and the boys were all individually trying to, do what they wanted to do. And the girls beat them, and when I tell you everything, and the boys literally were devastated that they, especially the tug of war, were devastated that they lost the tug of war. But you do see where, again, when you bring them together, and we talked about it. We talked about working as a team and how much more you can accomplish working as a team. And so, but anyhow, we do get them together sometimes, and, obviously not as much as we would like with COVID going on, but.
Excellent. Maybe one thing we can do is we can bring together the Neon Sock community with Angel, as well as the Heart and Mind community, as well as Boys Hope, Girls Hope. What we'll do right now is we'll take a 6-minute break. We will reconvene at 10:20, where Dr. Sacasa will help us to understand the virtue of hope, the virtue of hope. We'll see you soon. Well, welcome back to phase 2, Faith, Hope, and Love. Today we're focusing on the virtue of hope. Dr. Mario Sacasa, in our first segment, helped us understand some of the psychological aspects of what I've titled the dynamic of hope, the way that we can increase in hope, some of the challenges that are present there. And what we as panelists have done with the help of Dr. Sacasa is we've looked and seen how specifically within our communities can we respond with concrete means by which to really facilitate an authentic healing action that doesn't engender a resentment, that doesn't have somebody saying, yeah, but you're trying to ask me to do something that I kind of know isn't true, etc., but to appeal to those elements that we know are true. Such as what it means to be a human person, that it's the virtues that bind us, and that we have a preferential option. We're called to serve those amongst us that are most needful and most in need of a modeling experience for God's love. One of the elements, we're in phase 2 now, phase 3, not to be confused with COVID, okay? I'm not bringing us back, we're good to go. But in spring of this year, we are transitioning to the concrete steps with the facilitation of Dr. Angel Adams-Parham that we're going to take at the University of Holy Cross to respond to all of these challenges. We're scaling up the Heart and Mind community, right, which is a present modeling community where those that have overcome poverty, as well as those that are kind of new to the university from challenging environments, learn what it is to look up to each other and to be able to serve each other. We're scaling up. We're going to be scaling up to 20 Heart and Mind members of the community, as well as 20 mentors to be able to serve them. And in the spring, we're also going to look at the concrete steps, many of which, as I look at this, Chuck talked about giving an allowance tied, right? An allowance tied to what I call confidence targets. Mario, you didn't start on day 1 with 26.2 miles, right? As a matter of fact, at the end, you almost didn't end with 26.2 miles.
That's correct.
Confidence targets. We realized on the front end, we were offered the option of just having a direct deposit for the awards that our Heart and Mind students and mentors receive. And the thought I had was, I don't want that. The award is to offset having to get a second part-time job so that our students could go to counseling and tutoring, meet with their mentors, etc. But what I wanted to do was monthly, to see them, to spend time with them, and to say, great job, Carla. Here's your award. right?
Mm-hmm.
Great job. Here's your award, and to give them that tangible expression. So we're going to continue to tease these out, especially as we bring our communities together and share best practices. Please be aware that you can put comments in the chat section, and our panelists can see those. If we have time, we'll address them. If not, we can address them afterwards. And we're going to be able to talk more about this. Our schedule is our own. We're now beginning at 10:23. So Mario, if about 30 minutes works, and then we'll get a little bit closer to 11 o'clock, and we're going to finish today promptly at 12 o'clock with this first installment, as we now get ready for the next installment, which is going to be Father Josh Johnson, who's going to help us to understand how the virtue of love is operative in healing action. I now give the floor to Dr. Sacasa.
Thanks, Dr. Amick. Yeah, we have a doctor, a deacon, and a father leading us in this. So it's easy to get confused about who's whose.
Sounds like a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Bad joke. All right, well, let's pray. Let's bring us back into prayer, and let us together offer the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. All right, guys, I greatly appreciate your continued time and attention. It's a sincere honor and pleasure and gift to be here with you. So let's keep talking about hope. You know, what I love about these lectures, and I've given this series a few times, and the first time I gave this series was to a group of permanent deacons in the Diocese of Des Moines, Iowa. This was August of last year. And the deacon afterwards was like, man, I didn't realize we could talk so much about hope. And I was like, yes, we can, because hope is so misunderstood. It becomes this passing thought, this just, I don't know, afterthought idea that we're like, whatever, hope, passive, blah, blah, blah. But then we rob hope of its richness. We rob hope of its gift, of its pertinence, and of its importance in our lives. And so the first lecture, as we've articulated already, speaking about hope in this natural sense of what are the things that I can do to cultivate hope? What are the things that are within my domain in terms of my personal agency, my personal responsibility? How do I make goals bite-sized? How do I surround myself by people who are good models, good influencers for me? How do I imagine a better version of myself and then strive to go to achieve that better version? How do I actually work actively towards becoming those things? So all of that is beautiful, but at the same time, it's also a piece of a much broader conversation when it comes to hope, and that's what we want to be focusing in on today. You know, as I've thought about the goal setting and looking at that as a definition of hope, I think that it's a good definition, but I think it's an incomplete definition. In and of itself, setting goals can be value neutral. You know, goal setting in and of itself doesn't necessarily have to lead towards virtue. We were speaking about Black Panther here for a few minutes, and I think this is a great example of that. Somebody like Killmonger, the years that it took for him to execute his plan and to become the Black Panther, it was a long, hard, arduous process of him training, learning how to be a killing machine, basically, and to be manipulative and to use people to get to the goal that he wanted. And he achieved his goal. He became the king for a portion of the movie. We would not look at that and extol that as a virtue, as something good, that he didn't become the better version of himself by becoming the king and rising to power through violence and through those means. We would not say that those are the things that happen. So goal setting in and of itself has some limitation. I think also of maybe the high school senior who is, you know, jokingly, sometimes in the movies they talk about kids wanting to lose their virginity on prom night or something of that nature. Like, oh, I can't go to college, you know, not knowing how to perform well in the bed. Well, okay, so you have this desire, you have the willpower for it, and then now maybe you start talking to your buddies, or you go on YouTube, look at a video, start reading stuff or whatever. Now you have the way power for it, and we're like, okay, well, you know, promiscuity in and of itself isn't really supported, isn't really a healthy behavior. And so we would say that that goal wouldn't inherently lead towards a better version of himself. So while goals are absolutely important and we need them in life, as we've discussed, in and of themselves, they do not fully encompass this concept of hope. And this is where our faith kicks in. This is where our knowledge and understanding of the deeper truths of the person really come into being. Other limitation here is when we speak about death and terminal illness. A dear friend of mine just lost his wife here about a month ago. And being at her funeral, honestly, was one of the most spiritual, uplifting, hopeful experiences that I've ever had in my life. At her funeral, I mean, it was something that was completely remarkable and something that I'm still trying to unpack even to this day. But my point in saying this is that there has to be some greater desire, some deeper hope that anchors our life. And that's the hope that we speak about when we say of a theological virtue. When we speak of the virtues, again, earlier I just quickly ran through them, but in the Catholic sense, there's 7 big virtues. We have 4 that are the cardinal virtues, and those are fortitude, temperance, prudence, and justice. Our capacity to engage in these, to grow in prudence, to grow in temperance, to grow in fortitude, and to act in justice, all of that is within our domain, and certainly we work with grace for that. But then when we speak about the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love that we've been articulating so far, at the end of the day, we call them theological because they are a gift. Theological in the sense that they come from God, that faith has to come from the Lord. I cannot even say the Lord's name without the Holy Spirit inspiring me, as the scripture says. I cannot actualize love unless I have grace residing within me. Why? Because God is love. And when I live in love, I live as God lives. We need God's grace to guide us in faith. We need God's grace to guide us in love. And we need God's grace to guide us in hope. That at the end of the day, our hope rests in the Lord and firmly in the Lord. If we are honest with ourselves and where we find ourselves today, and really to any point in our human history, is that we are on a journey and that we are moving we are moving in space and time. And as we are journeying in space and time, we are constantly wrestling with our desires, with our emotions, with our longings, the things that we want to accomplish, the goals that we want to see, the person that I want to become. But if we're honest with ourselves and where we find ourselves right now, and even myself, I have to acknowledge that there's a certain element of who I am right now that is incomplete, that there is a not yetness that exists within me. And this not yetness, this incompleteness, I don't want to say vacuum, that's or lacuna, it's too big, this lack that is there, is privation of who I am, this desire to be the best version of myself, all of this, right, is the imitation of hope. See, if we're honest and we recognize that even with all my human agency, even with all my human capacity, even if I strive to set all the goals that I want to do, the best version of myself is waiting for me in heaven. And it is God's grace that guides me. It is God's grace that allows me to contend with my limitations as a person. It is God's grace that makes up for those limitations. As I said earlier, I'm somebody who tends to push the needle on trying to get stuff done. And I constantly am frustrated by my own limitations. And as a choleric, I've had to learn how to be patient with others in their limitations as well. When people don't do the work that I ask them to do as quickly as they need to do it, or when people don't perform to tasks, these are the things that I've learned how to be more merciful with, not just in others, but even within myself. Because I'm constantly pushing to try to make up for those things that I feel that I'm lacking inside of me. And so I'm constantly butting up against the limitations of my humanity. And whenever I butt up against the limitations of my humanity, it is in those moments that I cast my hope, my anchor. I place it in something more. I put my anchor in the Lord. I say, God, I am at my wit's end, or even at my exhaustion, at my breaking point. I'm at the moment where I've given everything I can give, and sometimes it still isn't enough. But Jesus, I have hope in you that everything that I've given is in fact enough. And this theme continues to repeat itself in my life. Even just yesterday, I always spend 30 minutes in prayer and with scripture. And yesterday I found myself in Mark's gospel, chapter 3, and the parable of the sower, where he talks about going out and sowing and then going to bed and then waking up the next day and seeing the plants kind of emerging out of the ground, that there's no control over that. That the guy has done what he needs to do. He tilled the soil, he watered it, he planted the seed, he did everything he could do. But at the end of the day, you know, something else has to emerge. Things have to happen outside of my purview, out of my domain of control. Other things have to happen, have to be raised up. And it was a beautiful reminder for me that I'm like, man, okay, as much as I'm hustling with my clients, with this ministry, with the podcast, with these lectures, with the writings, with everything else, I have to recognize that there's other things, other good forces that are happening that are going to bring about some fruit. And that there's certain elements of my life that I just fundamentally have no control over. And so again, it's when we meet these moments, when we meet these limitations, that we are invited by God to cast our hope in him. We are invited by God to be reminded of his supremacy and lordship over our lives. We are invited by God to rest in his goodness and to trust that he genuinely is the author of all of human history. So let me say it this way. Let me bring up my slides here again. In the virtue of hope, more than any other, man understands and affirms that he is a creature, that he has been created by God. This is Joseph Pieper, who is a German philosopher, articulated so beautifully many of these thoughts with regards to the virtues. And this is what he says. He said that in the virtue of hope, again, man understands and affirms that he is a creature and that he is being created by God. Hope is where we say, all right, God, I'm a human person. I've done everything that I could possibly do. And in the end of the day, I give the rest to you. God, I recognize that I don't have eyes on everything that's happening. I do not see time and space as you see. I do not know and organize creation as you have organized it. I jokingly in my last lecture talked about the Job story and how God at the end of the scene comes in and says, you know, were you there when I created the universe, basically? I mean, God's reminding us that here we are. We find ourselves in these points continuously where we recognize that we are not always in control of everything that we want to do. And so we have to have hope, and we have to choose hope and rest our hope in this. Now, I'll say this. The Catechism, when it speaks about hope, beautifully ties hope then to the first commandment. And what is the first commandment? Well, let's go back into that. The first commandment is, if I can pull my slides up, here we go, is this, right out of Exodus. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness or of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that it is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. It is written in Matthew's gospel, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve. When I think about the various idols of my life, whether it is success is a big one, man, that I place my hope so much in my personal accomplishments. And then I become a slave to success in terms of busting my tail and trying to prove myself to others. Sometimes maybe I fall into some personal sin and I expect those things to bring me satisfaction that cannot satisfy the depths of who I am. This is what the Lord is saying. Now, the Lord isn't saying that he can't use natural means to bring about his grace, sacramentally speaking. Sure, yes, in the 7 sacraments, but even in a natural sense. I love nature. I love going out for a good hike. There aren't any mountains in New Orleans. So, you know, we have to drive kind of far away to find some rest. But when I'm able to find rest in God's beauty, I am reminded of how awesome God is to create these majestic mountains. The first time I went to the Rocky Mountains, I was like, I get it. I understand why the Native Americans worship these things, because they are so majestic and so awe-inspiring that you would almost think that they are deities in and of themselves, but they aren't. There's holiness that exists in them for sure, but it is there because God has given us. God has created the world in order to be absolutely spectacular. And so we place our hope in here, hope in the Lord. Here, God, right after the leading of the Israelites out of slavery, out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, performing one miracle after another, has proven himself to be a trustworthy and a hopeful person. See, in the Old Testament, there's often a conversation about memory. There's a lot of discussion about memory. You know, we recall God, the God of our fathers, the God of our forefathers. Remember God who led you out of the land. There's always this appeal towards memory, appeal towards these great stories, even generations, centuries later. Remember the God who led King David. I mean, constantly these appeals of God's involvement in human history. Well, why? Why is memory so important in the Old Testament? Well, the reason that memory is so important is because it's in these moments that we see God not just reveal his power and his majesty, but God reveal himself for who he is as a loving father who cares for us, who creates us, who desires us, who guides us, who leads us. And then we get into the New Testament and we see in the New Covenant, Jesus as the incarnation himself. And then, yes, in the spes unica, our only hope lies in the cross. Why? Because in the cross of Jesus Christ, do we see God himself take up all of human sin, all of human suffering, and then redeem the heck out of all of it. That's the beauty. That's the beauty. And that's the story that we all have to cling to in ourselves. So memory is important. We have tradition. We have stories that we want to be reminded about how God has intervened, how God has revealed himself, revealed truths. How has God revealed himself in human history so that I can place my hope in an honest relationship with God? So the Catechism continues and says this. It says, in the first commandment embraces faith, hope, and charity. When we say God, we confess a constant, unchangeable being, always the same, faithful and just, without any evil. It follows that we must necessarily accept his words and have complete faith in him and acknowledge his authority. He is almighty, merciful, and infinitely beneficent. Who could not place all hope in him? Who could not love him when contemplating the treasures of goodness and love he has poured out on us? Hence, the formula God employs in Scripture at the beginning and in the end of the commandments is, I am the Lord. I am God. I am God. And I have opened up the possibilities to you. All the goals, all the desires, all the dreams, everything that you long for comes from him, because it's God prompting inside of us a journey, a leading us, a revelation of these truths. See, the beautiful thing about our faith is that, yes, it's corporate. Yes, absolutely, we have tradition. Yes, we have communal worship that we absolutely need. Yes, we have dogma. Yes, we have truths. But even within all those commandments and all those truths, there's a beautiful big sandbox that we have the capacity to reveal God in my own particular way, because I am unique and unrepeatable. And so the way that I experience the Lord is unique. The way I'm able to articulate and to share and to use my gifts and my talents to bring about God's kingdom here on earth is particular to myself, in particular to who I am as a person. But I constantly appeal and place hope in the Lord and listening to the desires of my heart to guide me along the way. What are the hopes? What are the dreams? What are the things that I'm really longing for? You want to know how hopeful you are? How big are your dreams? How big are the goals? What are the things that you're really going after? What are we really trying to achieve on earth? Where are we going? What's our final destination? These big questions are anchored in hope. And Benedict says this then, only when the future is certain, when heaven is as a positive reality, does it become possible to live the present as well. The one who has hope lives differently. When I believe and know that I can achieve heaven because God has opened it up, it makes all the hardships of life possible. This is what we saw. This is what I saw in the funeral of my friend Elise. Throughout the 6 years of her cancer diagnosis, I saw them cling to hope the whole time because they knew that God had a plan. They knew that there was meaning and purpose in the midst of their suffering. And even in her death and in the moment of her death, beautiful stories were emerged. In her funeral, beautiful conversions were happening. God has a plan in all of this. That's in the big picture. In the little picture, if we bring it down a couple notches, when we talked about the boys' hope, and Chuck, when Chuck was sharing about, the differences between having people who are just a few steps ahead and could give that hope and be a witness and be a positive reality of what one is possible living, versus when you don't have those representative models, that changes the way that you interact. Because you say, when you see other people who are just a few steps ahead of you, that look like you, that have overcome the things that you've overcome, you're able to say, man, I have hope because that person was able to do it. And while, yes, I still have to be responsible for myself, at least I'm able to have hope and acknowledge the possibility that it is there. So when the future is certain as a positive reality, does it become possible to live the present as well? We can endure all things. We can do all things with grace that sustains us. So Benedict continues in his great encyclical, Spe Salvi, Saved in Hope. He says, his kingdom is not an imaginary hereafter, situated in some future that will never arrive. His kingdom is present wherever he is loved and wherever his love reaches us. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That's what we invoke every time that we say the Our Father. We pray for God's grace to come and manifest himself today, here, now, in our present circumstances, over a digital conference. We want God's grace to be with us in everything that we do. His love alone gives us the possibility of soberly persevering day by day, without ceasing to be spurred on by hope, in a world which by its nature is imperfect. Charles Peggy says this way. He says, back to this poem, Portal of the Mystery of Hope. Hope is not obvious. Hope does not come on its own. To hope, my child, you would have to be quite fortunate, to have received a great grace. It's faith that is easy and not believing that would be impossible. It's charity that is easy and not loving that would be impossible. But it's hoping that is difficult. And the easy thing and the tendency is to despair. And that is the great temptation. When we stack it all up and we look at the world and we put it into an algorithm, and we put the formula, and we look at humanity and we say, man, we've done some pretty rotten things to one another. We're pretty capable of doing awful stuff to one another. So why then is it even in the midst of that? Because that's a reality. We cannot excuse sin. We cannot excuse evil and its real effects on people and the real prices that people have to pay because of human sin. We have to really genuinely contend with the evils of other individuals. But even in the midst of that, the research still shows that the vast majority of us are optimistic. We tend towards optimism. Why? Why do we genuinely believe that things can be better? Are we dumb? Are we just ignorant? Or is there something inside of us that says that there's still, even despite all the suffering, even despite COVID and hurricanes and racism and violence and murder and all the evil things that we could talk about, is there something more profound to what it means to be a person? Is there a grace that can guide us to overcome all of this? His love alone gives us the possibility of soberly persevering day by day, without ceasing to be spurred on by hope in a world which by its nature is imperfect. As a therapist, one of the occupational hazards is burnout. And I'll say over the last few years that I personally have been experiencing that for the first time in my life. And it's been a challenge. I'm not going to lie. And at times the burnout, and the reason it's an occupational hazard is because day in and day out, what do? I listen to people's brokenness. I listen to people's stories. I listen to people's difficulties and challenges. And you can get inside your head and you can start thinking that this is it. This is all it is. This is as good as it's going to get, because it's a myopic view of human nature. I know when couples come to me that I'm only seeing the worst of them. I know intellectually, at least in my imagination, I know that it's just 1 hour a week and that there's other happy moments that they have, but I know that I'm seeing the brunt of the difficulties that are there. But sometimes it becomes too difficult because I'm human. I care for my clients. I love them. I have empathy and compassion for them. But man, it does get taxing, and then the despair can kick in. And I've seen and worked in institutions and organizations that, I wish I could say we're the most charitable, but weren't. And when you start seeing sin happening at a systemic, at a corporate level, at a level of culture within organizations, it becomes quite despairing. to be able to think that you have any say in being able to make some change. And so the narrative starts picking up, you know, this is it. Like, this is as good as it's going to get. At least you tried. At least you did the best you could. It didn't really matter. It didn't really do anything in the end. And all of that negative thinking, it has led me towards moments of depression and moments where I've had to fight against the negativity that is very real, when all the evidence is stacking up to saying despair is the most logical thing that you can choose, to still in the end anchor my experience into something more. And even in my moments of depression, and as low as they can get at times, or anxiety and the sleepless nights and the difficulties that emerge in all of that, they're still inside of me, and it's only spiritual. I can only speak of it as being something more profound than just my psychology, is to say that I do believe in hope. And I do believe that what I'm going through will pass, that I do believe that God will use everything in my experience for his goodness, that no stone will be unturned in my life, that every riddle will be answered, every question I have will be answered, that there is genuine purpose and meaning. And I have to be able to cling to these truths and believe in his providence and believe in his goodness and continue to choose hope, even when despair seems to be the most logical and reasonable answer to come to. So St. Augustine says this, though. He says, if we choose despair, we kill the soul. Two enemies of the soul here are despair and false hope. Well, we've been speaking about despair a little bit, but I just kind of want to give some concept to it. When we choose despair, what we are saying is that incompleteness, that feeling that I talked about earlier, this not yetness, is done, is done. The period is at the end of the sentence. The paragraph has been written. The book is done. We close it, and that's it. There's no more becoming when you choose despair. There's no more. It's it. It's it. It's done. And what has been left is this fixated moment, this fixated reality, that all there is this nonsense and this awfulness that's there. So when we choose despair, though, it is a sin against hope, because it is saying then that God's goodness won't permeate to me, that there is this shelter, there is this cloud that is going to prevent me from receiving that grace and that goodness, and all I can do is just live within the despair and the reality of my life. So again, I'm not saying that it's not real, it's not honest. It's having doubt, of course, is part of the journey. But despair makes it difficult to engage. Despair makes it difficult even to engage in good things. A couple summers ago, it was that trip. We went to the Rocky Mountains, actually. I was having a particularly difficult year. And we knew I finished my doctorate. The stress of writing the doctorate, for everybody else on the call who has a PhD, knows that the dissertation year or years can be really taxing on one. In addition to everything that was happening with work and different challenges that were present there. I knew we needed a big vacation. So we went to the Rocky Mountains, huge vacation. I mean, it's a 20-hour drive from New Orleans, but man, it was worth every minute of it. On the way back, usually every summer, I try to put together like a video of the vacation. I take all the pictures and I put some music to them and do all of that. But that particular summer, I had a hard time putting the video together because what the despair was preventing me from even acknowledging the good things. Or sometimes, like when you have a particular hard moment and you look at pictures of yourself from those moments, you don't want to see it because it just evokes into your memory all the difficulties and the hardships that are there. That's what we're speaking about. Being able to then see and acknowledge that that difficulty is real, yes, and that we shouldn't be poking at that and keep reminding ourselves of it, for sure, but that we need to be honest and active in fighting and praying against despair and saying that cynicism is not the final answer. Killmonger was wrong in the end. As reasonable as his requests were, he was wrong. He was wrong in the end. And we know this to be true. The other side then, if we talk about two errors in hope, one is despair. And the other, St. Augustine, he beautifully talks about a false hope. When we're too casual with our desire or expectations, when we maybe have success too early in life and we think that, well, look how good I am, not taking into account all the other factors that played a role into that. This can lead to laziness. Presumption is a sin against hope also, because it doesn't take into account reality. We don't need to work anymore. All right. Success is given to me no matter what. And the Catechism warns against this when it talks about forgiveness without conversion or glory without merit. These things are dangerous to the soul. It's a slippery slope towards losing faith, because we always must be humble before the Lord.